Let me suggest this. Danner, I'm going to ask you to take this cordless mic if people have questions, because when I was listening before, I had a hard time hearing across the room. And why don't we start? Is there anyone on the panel that wants to ask another panelist a question? And then we'll open it up. My attitude is the more provocative the question or the dialogue or the debate, the better for everyone. So don't hold back. Okay. First here, Bob, did you have a question?
I have a question for Bob.
In the microphone,
Bob
and then we'll go over here. Thanks.
So I know some conservatives, and I'm a Republican, but I know some conservatives and I'm a Republican, and most of my conservative friends say that, yes, exactly like you say, that there should be a tax break, but it needs to go to corporations. It doesn't need to go to people. Are you a supply side guy, or are you a demand side guy, and why?
We're rather ecumenical on this question. As long as the tax cut, the corresponding cut, is 100% of the revenue raised from the carbon tax, we're really open to how it should be returned. We're open to corporate tax reduction, individual tax reduction, FICA tax reduction, which is a bill I had in Congress, or a dividend approach where you collect the money but you send it back, sort of Alaska oil fund system. But it's interesting, you know, I was in a group one time, mixed group, conservatives and some progressives. Kevin Hassett at the AEI of the American Enterprise Institute said to the progressives in the crowd, he said, "You're very concerned about climate change." They shook their head, yes. He said, "Okay, I got a deal for you. We'll price carbon, do that together, and then I get to choose what the offsetting cut is. Deal?" And several of them started going like this. He said, "Why not?" And they said, "Because you'll choose the corporate income tax to reduce." And he said, "Precisely. So it's a gut check for you, isn't it? How important is climate change to you? Let me cut corporate income taxes, and then we'll deal with climate change." And we'll get the double dividend, by the way, and there's a real good supply side argument that you get a double dividend out of this. You get not only emission reduction, but you also get economic growth if you cut the right kind of taxes. So back to that point, we're the only gig in town, really in Washington, that's talking about a revenue neutral tax cut. And so if you're a conservative here or no conservative, tell them that. You know, the only folks that are talking about a tax cut in these times are these people who want to change what we tax. Why not tax emissions rather than tax income?
Okay, question over here.
I had two questions regarding the model that you just put out there. Number one, how would you expect new innovations to compete against existing technologies that have been entrenched and actually government subsidized for decades? And the second question is, you talk about capturing the whole cost of energy. How would you do that when you have energy that also influences other policies in the nation, like its foreign policy as well?
Yeah, first, you're correct. We have subsidized oil and gas for a long time in this country. Had to do with national security, really. It had to do with, you know, moving away from coal and getting longer range in ships and things like that with oil. And so you're right about that. It's just that I think in order for us to be true to what we say that we believe as conservatives, that we really don't want the government meddling in these things, and we really don't want cylinders.
And how does it solve the situation you're trying to solve? You're saying it's going to generate new innovations. New innovations not compete against existing technologies that are so entrenched in our culture, in our society for decades of subsidy. How is it going to work?
Yeah, let me give you an example. So, you know, coal is currently being replaced by natural gas. Dana, help me out on this. I think 6 coal-fired facilities in South Carolina right now are being converted to natural gas. That has to do with what it sort of really proves the point that we're making as the Energy and Enterprise Initiative, is that free enterprise solves this problem if you get a price signal. And the price signal right now is coming from the miracle of directional drilling and fracking, resulting in an increased supply of natural gas, driving down the price, and the result is 6 coal-fired plants here in South Carolina are shutting down, being converted to natural gas. That's pretty exciting. And what's also exciting to us is that ExxonMobil's Rex Tillerson, their CEO, says he's for a carbon tax, basically what I've just described. And I once asked the lady that used to give me PAC checks when I was in Congress from ExxonMobil, I said, help me out. If I appear in front of an audience that has progressive in it, they're going to say, no way, Rex Tillerson's just trying to kill cap and trade. That's all he's trying to do. He has no interest in a carbon tax. And she set me right straight. She said, Bob, transportation will always be petroleum-based, and we're in that business. And natural gas can take coal, and we're in that business. So we can make money on both of these. So you put the cost in on coal right now, and I'm not out to get coal. We're not in a war on coal. But if you put all the cost in on coal right now, those 6 plants in South Carolina being converted turns into dozens and hundreds of plants across the country because of the price signal of all the cost being in on coal. And so you get real innovation. So there's there's an industry that's been subsidized for a long time. Natural gas has had some subsidies, I would argue not as much as petroleum, because of the second part of your question, the national security part, is if you put in the true cost of petroleum, including the supply line protection out of the Middle East, the price of gasoline is way higher than we're actually paying at the pump. That's a hard thing to sell to constituents, but it's really true. And so, so our challenge is to get through to folks and to say, let's have a true cost comparison, right?
Amy, Bob, or Tom, any comments on that topic before we take another one? Nope. Okay, another question, comment, sir? Gus?
This is for Bob Perkowitz. Bob, your organization has the most sophisticated plan that I've seen for reaching out to new communities and beyond the people who are already committed or engaged on the climate issue. Could you describe a little bit more for us about how you plan on going about doing that?
Thank you, Gus. I think that it's pretty much the same thing that a lot of people have said here. We call it institutional engagement by sectors, but if you take a particular community, like let's say the healthcare community, there are a lot of what we call green verticals that are bubbling up all over in America. It's people that are concerned about climate and sustainability, concerned about their environment, and they don't want to join an environmental group. They want to, people generally self-organized, wealthy people self-organize around morals and try to attack problems. People that are impacted do, but 80 or 90% of Americans, they care, like you might care about gun control or immigration, one side of the issue or another, but you're not going to donate money or go to the websites or whatever it is. You will follow your tribe on that thing. So it's basically the way you get people is like if in Charleston, South Carolina, if the major hospitals, if the major, I don't think you're going to get the newspaper, but the major businesses and hospitals here all say that, hey, we are going to do something about it ourselves, and we're going to encourage our people in our community to do that. You build up, instead of having people having to join another tribe, join an environmental group, they can take action within the tribe that they're in. So that's what we're trying to do, is empower existing organizations to take action on climate change and bring their stakeholders with them.
Okay, ma'am?
Just a quick question, sort of dovetailing on your response. If you continue to take action, as you put it, within your tribe, I don't usually use that terminology, then how will you engage other people? Like was mentioned in the earlier panel, you need traditional knowledge in regard to a lot of this. And we're here as Gullah Geechees, and in this area this happens a lot. People are working in silos, as people like to call it, because the silo is where their tribe meets. And so then they're not engaging with people who already live on the land, are faced with these problems, seen them first, lived through the hurricanes, the whole 9 yards, to say, how did you do it? Which is now this whole other field called resilience, and another one called adaptation. But we live it. So we don't have a word in our language for those. We don't have words in our language for those. So how do you change your model if you keep talking to the same people and not coming out to gather all the tribes in a big clearing, other than this anniversary?
I think that, we have a concept that we call full representation. We're about people. So we are actually forcing our organization to be statistically representative in all the leadership groups, and everything that we do has to include people. We cannot just be, if you take a look at the top 20 environmental organizations in America, and you take a look at their leadership, and you take a look at their boards, it is 90% plus white, probably 95% plus white. It is probably 80% male. Those are the people that got us into this problem. And I don't mean to, like Amy said, men, and then she added, and women to the quote. Because women are going to solve these things. And ordinary, regular Americans, one person here said that the middle class is the people getting screwed, and another person said that it's the most disadvantaged people that are getting screwed. They're both getting screwed bad. And we have to give them voice and power too. So we're doing a lot of different things to do that. I don't think it's time enough to tell here, but I'd be glad to talk to you after and get your thoughts on it too.
Okay, let me take the moderator's privilege. Honorable Bob, I respect you tremendously as an intellectually pure conservative. I'm a lifelong knee-jerk liberal, admit it, proud of it. Tell me about the other subcategories under the rubric of Republicans, such as the Tea Party people, who to me are more visceral, less intellectual. Gross generalization, if there's some exceptions in the room, I'm sorry. But how do we deal with those who seem so influential now in the Republican Party and dictating a lot of policy out of the Republican side?
Well, I'm tight with them. I'm tight with the Tea Party. Just kidding. They're the people that tossed me out of office. But yeah, they didn't like me too much. I understand why. I mean, I was focused on these things that sound like a long way away, and they were focused on the immediate problems. It really is a huge challenge to get the challenge. And when you said Honorable Bob, see, Bob, if we had two Bobs here, here's Honorable Bob as well. When Bob was talking earlier about those institutions, the challenge with the Tea Party really is that they came to a place where they decided, let's see, the church failed us, government failed us, and now banks failed us, and they became sort of like my oldest brother, who's a Glenn Beck watcher. He's decided that really he doesn't need anybody with a PhD to tell him anything. That he can substitute his judgment for these sorts of things. And so it's this loss of trust in institutions that has to be restored in order for us to decide that we can work together to solve this. It's to the point just now about coming into the clearing and finding this place where you can work together. That's a big challenge for people that got frightened about their own lifestyle and about all the foundations of all these important institutions shaking. And they decided to go to themselves and just be individualistic about this rather than to have any kind of thought that we could cooperate and come together with a solution. That's a big challenge, and it requires, I think, the end of the Great Recession. Once that's over, then we might have a chance of coming to the conclusion that it makes sense to come together in the clearing, as you just said, and figure out a way to solve this. I think that part of it, our need at our shop is to do what something that Tom Friedman told me. He said, Inglis, here's your problem, is that when people see the problem, perceive that there's a problem in climate change, if they admit it, then it follows that there's going to be a bigger government that's going to take more money, have more regulations, and it's basically going to grow the nanny state. So he said to me, your job is to break that connection so that when people are confronted with a problem, they don't perceive that the solution is a loss of liberty, that the solution could be a vibrant free enterprise system where people are making money serving customers that they could get really excited about. So that if you can change that from it's just like, if you tell me, you're my doctor, surgeon, you say, well, here's the surgery plan, we're going to remove your head, and then after we've got your head off, we're going to work on your spine. Well, I'll go back and say, doctor, I think I can live with the pain in my spine, thank you. Let's not do this surgery, right? And so that's what we've got to do, is we've got to convince people that really it's going to be great on the other side of this. Not just that it's going to be, less, it's going to be more. It's going to be great.
Okay, the other Bob had a comment, then we have a question here, and then we'll come back to the other side.
Bob and I have participated in some conservative group meetings in D.C., and I just want to make the point that the conservatives in D.C., and I think you express it more eloquently than I do, are not normal people. They're not like conservatives outside of the Beltway. If you take a look at all the polls, they're like 90% denial on climate change, and most Republicans, really get it. I think that, that they might not have an answer and they might be concerned about it, but the people inside the Beltway are totally different than people here.
Okay, I had a question. Microphone over here.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to bring up a counterpoint. There seems to be kind of an outcry against the one conservative in the audience. The last 12 years has been pretty grim across the board from federal energy policy. There's almost nothing coming out of Washington on both sides of the aisle. The Obama administration, the only thing they really did was they put in place a stimulus plan, and as part of that, tagged on some requirements for energy efficiency, kind of cobbled them together in a last-minute effort that forced a lot of money to go down to the states for lighting repairs, lighting replacements. Most of that technology is made in China, so we end up stimulating the Chinese economy. And at the end of the day, other than that effort, there was very little energy policy in the last 4.5 years. Then we go back to the previous 8 years, and there's little or nothing there. And then if you wanted to include Clinton's administration, he promoted NAFTA, and he promoted normalized relations with China, which drove a lot of work overseas where they don't have energy policy. And so I'm looking at climate change, and we've done little or nothing in the last 20 years. What, other than the suggestion today to look for some sort of carbon tax, are we going to be seeing over the next 4 years from the administration, from Congress?
All right, Amy, why don't you go first, and then
Okay.
Tom.
Well, first of all, there was $90 billion of clean energy investments from the stimulus package that were much greater than just electricity upgrades. There was high-speed rail. There was a whole series of energy efficiency block grants that I imagine the mayor can speak about that actually really helped transform low-income housing to be much more energy efficient than it would have been. I think actually the biggest thing that this administration has done is the car rule, where they have essentially doubled the fuel efficiency of cars, and for the first time ever imposed fuel efficiency limitations on trucks and buses. I think we're going to get to, I think it was 54 miles per gallon by 2017 for cars. In addition, the president made a lot of commitments internationally. I know we haven't necessarily followed through on them, but I think I read somewhere that we're at about 17% below 2005 greenhouse gas emissions right now, probably due not so much to policies, but to the economy slowing down. The most important thing, I guess, that he also did was he allowed the Environmental Protection Agency to find greenhouse gas emissions to endanger the environment, which triggers the authority of that agency to start regulating under the Clean Air Act, which was always the big threat to Congress, that regulation under the Clean Air Act is not the best way to regulate carbon. So that was the threat to try and motivate the development of new legislation that would allow some kind of carbon tax or a cap and trade program. My understanding is that there will be rules for greenhouse gas emissions for new sources. There will be rules, as far as I've been led to believe, for existing sources down the road. There is already in place a greenhouse gas registry program where everyone has to figure out how much they're emitting. You can't reduce it if you don't count it phenomenon. They are continuing to do a lot with respect to energy efficiency for appliances. There is the home energy retrofit program that the Vice President has championed. So I think what the President has been doing, what the administration has been doing and will continue to do, is everything they can without Congress' help. And I know we want them to do more, but I think they are doing a very good job of assessing what they can get through. The problem is, of course, when any of these agencies promulgate regulations, they get sued, and then the lawsuits allow another decade or so of delay. Tom Peterson, do you want to chime in?
Tom?
I didn't want to put a bunch of numbers and graphs up because that gets old in these things, but we have a paper that was actually published, the International Energy Workshop, that addresses these directly. And let me also add to that some very direct experience in China regards what they're doing on energy policy. First off, if you look at the projections for carbon dioxide emissions from our Energy Information Administration, and you compare the period of 2005 to 2011, and let's just leave aside 2012 and 2013, which is more of the same. By the year 2020, which is kind of a magic number for when we want to get our emissions somewhere around 1990 levels to know that we're on the pathway to dealing with the bigger things that have to follow, that gap has shrunken 70% every single year without exception. The projection of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States has declined. Now, they have a forecasting methodology. One of the things that we did is what's called a decomposition analysis, baseline decomposition shift, which is a fancy way of saying, why did this happen? By the year, and Amy raises a good point. When you look at a narrow period of time, which is the period of the recession, say to present, most of that's the economy and natural gas. If you look at the period to 2020, look at the period to 2030, the role of the economy in 2020, 22%. Natural gas supply and induced fuel switching, 6%. State electricity renewable portfolio standards, 6%. Other non-renewable standard renewables, 2%. Transportation renewable fuel standards, 6%. CAFE, the largest single action ever taken, 11%. Building codes and efficiency, 2%. Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, that's 4%. State energy efficiency standards, 12%. Other energy efficiency programs, 3%, a residual of 27% of additional sources, most of which are smaller scale actions that were designed for health protection. Some of them designed for fuel switching. This went through the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum for review. This is based on state-of-the-art decomposition analysis that's being done across a wide range of issue areas to figure out what all has happened during our recession and why has it happened. The reality is that proactive policies have actually been put in place at the subnational level and the national level in the United States of America that have dramatically closed this gap. China hasn't missed that point. The reason my organization is working in China is to help them engineer this same techniques that we have developed and applied widely in the United States, not under a national mandate, but through voluntary decisions that governors like Mark Sanford made, figure out how to get energy, economy, and environment on the same page. In China, under the 5-year plan, every governor has to meet an emissions reduction goal, an economic growth goal, and an energy intensity reduction goal. Let me just finish. What they're doing right now, and I've just returned from Guangzhou in Beijing, is they are actively saying no to industries that can't cut the mustard and saying yes to ones who can. In Guangzhou, 118 million people. It is the industrial powerhouse of China. It is the largest manufacturing center in the world. This is the handwriting on the wall. The energy shift and the industrial shift of the world is already underway. They're using our stuff to do that. And if they succeed, guess who owns the world markets? And that's where they're all headed. This has turned into a race. It's not that they don't have an energy policy. It's not that we haven't done anything. We did a lot here, and they're taking it and they're running with it. We could run with it too. And these are growth markets. These are among the highest growth markets in the entire spectrum of the economy, and they're just sitting there waiting for us to move.
Okay, it's getting late. I promise one last question here. Hopefully it'll be crisp. I'm sure all the panelists will be here for the next half hour during the break, and we all fully realize that as much gets accomplished in the hallways as it does during these sessions, so I urge you to come up, ask questions, mingle among yourselves. With that said, this last gentleman, I promised him the last question.
Okay, so, when you talk about the presidential debate we just had, and they didn't really talk a lot about environmental problems and stuff like that. If this room was full of conservatives, how would they leave the room if you said, raise your hand if the number one cause of death for teenagers, if anyone has a teenager, half the people raise their hand. And then you say, well, the number one cause of death for teenagers is car accidents. And then you say, well, there's 15% more asthma now with all kids, not just, underprivileged kids, but, the conservatives kids too. There's 15% more asthma. And then you can say, yeah, look at ocean acidification. Look at the Chesapeake near Washington, D.C. That's overfished by 95% or something like that. The Maryland crabs are from Charleston. So, and half the people will say, well, I like Maryland crabs, but they're getting from Charleston. So the conservatives, this is something they can really feel, right? Because they're seeing it today. You can show them the icebergs, melting, and they might not believe it.
Sir, is there a crisp question in this?
Yeah, so how come there's not a debate? Why aren't we bringing that debate to them where they can feel it? Because there's lots of examples where they can feel it.
Bob, you want to take?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're right. We do have to, basically, in order to change people's minds, you have to go to them with a credible messenger and affirm their truth, right? I mean, you have to tell them, it's what we all need in order for somebody to change our mind, is a credible messenger who comes to us and affirms our truth, helps us to fit it into our worldview and to who we think we are and what we really believe deeply, right? And so that's the challenge. And so, a lot of left-leaning groups advertise with polar bears and such as that. A lot of conservatives think that the best place for that polar bear would be right in front of the fireplace, and the rug on the floor. And so that doesn't turn any conservative cranks. So what we have to do is go to them with something that does affirm their worldview. So that's the important thing for having people that go to them that know who they are and what they believe and why it's important to them. Because in the end, it takes both progressives with their focus on fairness and conservatives with their focus on merit and how the capitalist system can work as long as it's an accountable free enterprise system, that you put those two together and you got something really happening. And that's the end game. But in the meantime, we have to work through this identification, this cultural identification question.
Okay, well, I promised you the dream team. A round of applause, please.